We're free. Finally. Free now. Free to bump elbows again now. Free to finally see Mum, Dad, Gran, even that weird uncle now. Free to escape the news, finally say I do, or even a first, hey you, now. Free to go north side, south side, or even the seaside and be free as a city seagull now. Free to... Now. There's nothing like the feeling of being free now. Ready? Book a ride now with Free Now. And with Ireland's shortest wait times, we're always ready.
Your portfolio. Always consult with a qualified investment, legal, or tax professional before taking any action.
You've worked hard and saved for retirement, but remember, it's what you do with that money that really matters. How will you ensure that you wring every nickel out of your Social Security benefits? Could you pay fewer taxes in retirement? And how and when will you withdraw money from your IRA or 401k? Welcome to Secured Retirement Radio with Joe Lucy of Secured Retirement Financial. Joe's a certified financial planner, fiduciary, and a contributor to the Wall Street Journal, and has nearly 25 years of helping people just like you. This is where you can count on straightforward and objective advice on how to make your money go further in retirement. And now, here's your host, Joe Lucy.
You know, maybe you've already started to notice things are, well, they're starting to get a little bit more expensive lately. And it's not just an illusion. In fact, for the first time in a long time, inflation, it's a real threat to everyone. According to one report, the U.S. is on the verge of one of the worst bouts of inflation in decades. Now, what does this mean for you? Well, it could spell a real disaster if you're in or nearing retirement. Welcome to Secured Retirement Radio. I'm Joe Lucy, certified financial planner. I've got Dylan Malberg joining us in our St. Louis Park studio, and we've got a great show here planned for you today. You know, inflation is back, and it's eating up faster than any economist out there predicted. April's 4.2 inflation rate, it was the highest jump since the 2008 financial crisis. And that's not the most alarming news. Every month this year so far, it's been accelerating. Now, economist, world expert on inflation, Peter Schiff says, if you extrapolate the year-to-date monthly trend just in the first 4 months of 2021, we are on target for a whopping 20% consumer price increase this year. Says he likes to call this the inflation tax. And unlike the government's proposed tax hikes for just the high earners out there, this tax, it's going to hit everyone. And the economic impact from it, well, it could be worse than the pandemic that they were solving. So, coming up in today's program, we're going to talk about the inflation crisis in America today, what it means for you and your retirement, plus how to start positioning and protecting your investments against the impact of this silent killer.
Good morning, Joe.
Morning, Dylan. How are you?
Not too bad this morning. We just wanted to start the show here this morning, just talking about what is inflation, and I guess you think about the general kind of definition of it is it's a general increase in prices that robs you of your purchasing power, and in other words, basically what $1 bought you last year, maybe a carton of milk or eggs was $1, and this year now it's $1.10, and that just slow increase is really what we're seeing as a major threat coming up.
Well, where I start to see it, Dylan, is at the gas pump. We're up good solid 50, 60 cents right there. And it's not just our perception of what we're paying. The numbers, the facts are out there. 4.2% increase here. And for me, I think it's really, it's the outcome from almost $6 trillion in stimulus spending. Probably, most would agree we had to be doing something around the pandemic, but $6 trillion more docketed. At the same time, of course, they're cutting back on certain productions and this and that. And, well, we've got chip problems. You can't get a new car. Can't even order new golf clubs. Things are starting to get more and more expensive. And if you are in that golden decade, if you're getting near retirement and inflation is not a part of your overall financial planning, well, then I think you're going to be in for a rude awakening as we enter into 2022 and beyond.
Well, and you kind of talked about how we got here a little bit, and you think about going into COVID and all the lockdowns. I mean, we got down to 14.7% unemployment. That's 23.1 million people that were unemployed, and what that caused was $1.5 trillion less money to be spent in 2020 than there was in 2019. What does the government do? They inject, like you said, almost $6 trillion into the economy. And now as we see the vaccinations and everything starts to open up, consumers are out there and they're competing at a high level to buy these products that are, in most cases, in low demand. And that's causing this very quick increase in prices.
Well, I noticed it on the way into work this week. All of a sudden the roads are getting a little bit busier. It's clear that the inoculations, the vaccines are doing what they needed to do. But you start to compound that with all the extra money flow that's out there, low interest rates, stimulus checks out in the mail. All of this has created a situation where, well, there's some real economists out there that are starting to get alarmed at where we're at. Now, the Federal Reserve is saying that they expect a little bit higher inflation this year and a little bit higher inflation next year, and they're going to allow that to continue for a little while with the idea that it's somehow in 2023 and beyond it could go back to more norms, back to, say, 2%. But the real problem is this. We're at a tipping point. We're getting to a point where all of a sudden, inflation, if you're not bringing that into your retirement planning, if retirement planning is purely just about the investment strategies, and you're not starting to look at what's going to happen if interest rates have to start to rise because of that, not only that, if we start to go into more of a stagflation type, now how do we get through this? I mean, there are some economists out there. I was reading an article in the Wall Street Journal saying, they expect that we could see 1970s all over again. And, I guess that my mortgage rate's going to look really good if that's the case.
Yeah, and you think about, what inflation does, at the gas pump, grocery store, and this is even after, we look at the increase for retirees around healthcare, long-term care, and if you're in that golden decade and if you're not, 5 years before retirement, 5 years after, and you're not taking this into consideration, it's something that you really want to start looking at with your retirement plan. And I think the biggest, piece of inflation we're going to see long term is not necessarily at the gas pump or grocery store, but it's going to be around the tax return.
Well, and a lot of this is just us getting back into real world again, right? Just The Hill had an article called "Pent Up Consumer Demands Fuels Post-Pandemic Spending Spree," released here just on May 18th. But it says that the data is showing spending levels exceeding that same period of time in 2019. Remember when the coronavirus wasn't even in the radar? That's a year before all this, and indications are that consumers have to be ready to start looking at this. And, it's like you said, Dylan, it's not just our gas pump. It's not just our groceries. It's going to be housing. It's going to be, taxes. We've got $6 trillion here, more on the way. President Biden ran on a campaign saying he was going to raise taxes, of course, just for those rich people. But I don't think there's really a question on whether or not that's going to trickle down to middle America, mass affluent, the rest of us down here. And we need to really start putting this into our planning again for maybe the first time in almost 30 years.
No, and even locally, here in Minnesota, we're still the $300 a week for unemployment going out till September. That doesn't look like it's going to stop anytime soon. So not only tax on a federal level, but how is it going to impact you even on the state tax levels going forward?
If you're joining us this morning on Secure Retirement Radio, we are talking this morning about the inflation crisis in America and how it can impact your retirement. Because growing your retirement savings today is far more challenging than it ever has been. Now, you may not realize it, but the fastest, the safest way to grow your nest egg right now could be reducing your taxes throughout retirement. After all, money saved that you end up paying Uncle Sam is more money that you have to spend on you and your family and to protect you from inflation. That's why we're making a special offer just for the listeners on today's program. I want you to learn how you can reduce, even eliminate taxes in your retirement with a free secured retirement tax analysis. Here's how it works. We just gather some basic information from you. We'll determine some tax saving strategies that are best suited for your specific and tailored situation. We run it through the lab, and then we will sit down and we'll share these strategies with you so that you can see exactly how much money you can save. Now, we aren't talking about some simple deductions that you're probably your accountant, your CPA, your tax preparer, which is going to save you just a couple dollars on this year's return. We're talking about some real money here, tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars in retirement. If you'd like to schedule your complimentary secured retirement tax analysis, you're going to want to call right now at 952-777-8838. That's 952-777-8838. I believe the opportunity to save money on taxes is starting to run out. $6 trillion in deficit and counting, or economic spending, and a presidential administration that is promising to raise taxes, and it's going to trickle down. So you can't wait. Give us a call this morning, 952-777-8838. Get your secured retirement tax analysis at 952-777-8838.
Consumer prices nearly quadrupled during the 70s and 80s inflation era, and could we see this happening again?
I hope not.
We'll share the answer when we come back.
He's Dylan Malberg. I'm Joe Lucy, certified financial planner. More with Secure Retirement Radio in just a few moments.
He's a certified financial planner, fiduciary, and a contributor to the Wall Street Journal. And he's no ordinary Joe. You're listening to Joe Lucy on Secured Retirement Radio. You want to know how you could get even more income when you file for Social Security? Learn how in a free report, the Social Security Decisions Guide. This free report is full of the strategies that could help you get even more income when you file for your Social Security benefits. It's from Joe Lucy of Secure.
You know, some of the economists out there right now are saying that we're on the verge of the worst bout of inflation that we've seen in decades. Now, economist and inflation expert Peter Schiff is starting to call it the inflation tax. And unlike the proposed government taxes for just the high earners, inflation tax is about to hit everybody. Now, the economic impact from this could be far worse than the pandemic that we've just gone through. Welcome back to Secure Retirement Radio. I am Joe Lucy, certified financial planner. I got Dylan Malberg joining me in our St. Louis Park studio. Today, well, we're talking about inflation and the inflation crisis in America and how it could be impacting your retirement. Coming up in this segment, question might be asked, are we heading for the 70s and 80s type version of hyperinflation? I sure hope not, because it's going to be devastating to a lot of retirees that aren't prepared for it.
Oh, yeah, and we talked about in the first segment on Secure Retirement Radio this morning of, what is inflation generally, and really how do we get here today with economic stimulus, unemployment, everything that's been going on around the pandemic. And that's the question that everyone's asking, Joe. How far are we going to let this run? And are we going to put ourselves back into that, that inflation era of the 70s and the 80s?
Well, Dylan, I think inflation has been poised for a comeback ever since we started recovering from the pandemic. As soon as we started seeing, all of the money that went in there, the low interest rate environment, and then the stimulus checks and going on. When COVID-19 hit us and forced the U.S. to lock down last year, the economy was basically flipped upside down. In April of 2020, a little over a year ago, We peaked at 23.1 million, an unemployment rate at a staggering 14.7%. Now, as a result, U.S. consumers ended up spending about $500 billion less than 2020 than they spent the year before in 2019. Now, some businesses actually, they went away, they went belly up, laid off workers, manufacturers, halted, cut back production. And to date, we've injected somewhere near $6 trillion into COVID-19 relief. Now, this all has set the table for rising inflation. Now that Americans are vaccinated, businesses are reopening, inflation is on fire. More consumers are competing to buy things with limited supply, and industries hurt by the pandemic are ramping up to try to meet this demand, and the low supply, high demand, it all equated to a 4.2% inflation rate in the month of April. Rising inflation rates that puts retirees at a major disadvantage because they're already starting to get hit with these rising expenses. We're talking gas pumps, healthcare, long-term care, etc. Inflation takes away the purchasing power on everything. And if you're retired, if you've got a fixed income alone, well, it can put you in a situation where you start to struggle to make ends meet. You know, the number one fear, Dylan, has been for a couple generations now, running out of money in retirement. 74% of Americans say that they, lose sleep being concerned about running out of money. Now, the problem is inflation erodes that money far more rapidly than even a market correction could, and some of these other things. And just cutting back isn't necessarily what you're going to be able to do. And who wanted to do that in the first place? You retire to something. You don't want to have to adjust your lifestyle down the road because things get a little bit too pricey.
Oh, and we look back, and if you're listening to Secure Retirement Radio and you're 65 years old today, that means that back in 1981, you're 25 years old. And you look at what the inflation rate was back then, it was at 14%. And you look at that high inflation rate, I mean, it was devastating for retirees for that about 20-year period of time between 1966 and 1985. And you mentioned Robert Shiller, the Yale professor, and you look at the investors back then, they're expecting the 6, 7, 8% returns. We hear it all the time. What's an average return in the stock market? And well, really 6, 7, 8% returns, and then you have 14% inflation. I mean, you basically your returns are getting you zero. Well, I mean, in reality, it's probably negative, right? 8 minus 14 is really negative. And that's a 20-year period with no negative returns, and that's devastating for the retirees back then. And if you don't have a plan put together on how you're going to address that possibility going forward, you could very well find yourself and your family in that same position that maybe your parents or grandparents were in back in that time frame.
Well, so let's look at some numbers. Let's just look at the gas pump. That's the easy. We drive by them all the time. 258 or something this morning as I was driving in to go on our show here. Back in 1970, gas prices were 36 cents a gallon. 10 years later, $1.19. Now that was a little bit better than 400% increase. Going to today, we're, $2.58. You wonder how fast, if we really get into, as Schiller was saying, that we could see after this 4.2, you start adding up the numbers and you start to compound them and looking at them. He's projecting a 20% year-over-year increase in the CPIs. And this is scary stuff, especially for somebody that only has an investment strategy. Right? If you're going into retirement and really it's just been about, which are the right funds to own, you sit down and your reviews with your professional are around maybe we should trade this account for this account and you're not addressing what really is probably one of the most important things. Is how are we going to budget for higher health care? How are we going to budget in a long-term care event? How do we start to budget for increasing costs. And it's not just about trying to hit the pedal to the metal and get the best returns year over year and continue to do that. It's about really looking at some strategies that are going to reduce your overall or put more money in your pocket. And, I don't know if you're just joining us, this is the very first time you've heard Secured Retirement Radio. You may not be aware of this, but if you're a long-term listener, we have been beating the drum. We need to start looking at taxes. We got a $6 trillion deficit, more proposals on the way, a lot of money in the system. The markets are looking good, but we also have an administration that's saying that they are going to start increasing taxes. Over the last week, they announced that they're going to cut off a lot of the drilling up in Alaska. Well, you know what that does? It's going to increase the price of fuel. It's an inflationary, and we need to start looking at this because I think if we aren't careful, we could very well be waking up in 2022 at a whole new tax rate. And we got to start looking at how we're going to bring tax planning, true look forward tax planning, not just how to reduce our taxes on the return we just filed. I'm talking about how do I take these accounts and some of these tax burdened accounts like the 401ks that, is a blessing and a curse. We've been able to set aside that money. We got a tax deduction when we did. It's accumulated. It's compounded. Their account balance.
Trying to recruit someone right now? At irishjobs.ie, we know it's just one more thing on your endless to-do list. Somewhere between preparing Friday's presentation and picking up dinner. That's where irishjobs.ie can help. With almost 1 million registered career seekers in our constantly updated talent bank, you can be sure you'll always hire the pick of the bunch. Take that to-do list. Get a fresh perspective on your recruitment. Visit irishjobs.ie/hire.
Prices are, in many cases, far higher than we ever anticipated we would see. But we need to start taking this money down and spending it. It's about how to take it back, make it last a lifetime, make it tax efficient. That's most important. And putting together a strategy that is working with the investment solutions that you're working with, how to create an income plan that's going to last a lifetime and how to reduce taxes is really important, especially as we start getting into some of these more unprecedented times like we could be seeing here.
No, and again, we've been talking about it just with the impacts of inflation on your retirement plan this morning, and it's not just looking at inflation, it's looking at all the other risks that can go wrong in retirement and making sure that you've created a plan that's going to be flexible and allow you to enjoy your retirement regardless of what's going on with inflation or Wall Street or taxes.
Retiring today is different than before. It's far more challenging than it probably ever has been. And if you're not taking advantage of some of the tax strategies out there to reduce taxes, it could be the fastest and safest way that I know that you can paint yourself into a corner when it comes to your retirement. After all, with a tax strategy in place, it means less money that you pay the IRS, more money that you get to spend on your family. That's why we're making a special offer this morning. We'd like to make sure that we can sit down and share with you a secured retirement tax analysis. It's how you reduce and sometimes even eliminate taxes altogether in retirement. It's very simple. We sit down, we gather some information, I bring it down to the lab crunches the numbers, and then we'll sit down with you and we can show you specifically a tailored approach and how a best suited strategy would be for you to help you reduce your taxes. To schedule your secure retirement tax analysis this morning, give us a call right now at 952-777-8838. That's 952-777-8838. I believe this opportunity is going to be closing soon. So let's sit down. Let's share with you some ways that you can proactively address inflation and some of the other challenges out there for retirees with a secure retirement tax analysis. The number is 952-777-8838.
When we come back, how rising inflation could pose a major threat to your purchasing power and dramatically reduce your lifestyle in retirement.
He's Del Malberg, Joe Lucy here, CFP, and we'll be back with more from Secure Retirement Radio in a few moments.
He's a certified financial planner, fiduciary, and a contributor to the Wall Street Journal. And he's no ordinary Joe. You're listening to Joe Lucy on Secured Retirement Radio.
She took my heart away. Find us on your radio at AM 1130 and FM 103.5. Stream us on iHeartRadio. And now find us on, hey Alexa, play Twin Cities News Talk on iHeartRadio.
Getting Twin Cities News Talk station from iHeartRadio.
Thanks, Alexa.
From the cremation system.
You've already noticed that things are starting to get a little bit more expensive lately, huh? It's not an illusion. It's in the first time in a long time that we're starting to see inflation, and inflation is vogue again. I've been reporting now for a while that we could be on the verge of probably the worst bout of inflation that we've seen in decades. And the problem is, if you are in or you're nearing retirement, well, the timing for this couldn't be worse. Welcome back to Secure Retirement Radio. Joe Lucy, Certified Financial Planner. I got Dylan Malberg joining me in the St. Louis Park studio. Today, we're talking about this inflation crisis in America and what are some of the impacts it can have on your retirement. Coming up in this segment here, how you should start to prepare for rising inflation before it becomes a major threat to your retirement lifestyle.
And we're talking about inflation and the inflation crisis here in America this morning on Secure Retirement Radio, and what is inflation, how we got here today, and this big fear that's out there is, are we heading back for the inflation era of the 70s and the 80s, and if we do, how is that going to affect your lifestyle in retirement?
Well, okay, so little history lesson, right? We have to go back a little over a year ago. Let's go a month before COVID was even a thing, before we even knew about it, right? And all of a sudden, we started hearing about this little virus coming out of China, and it forced America to start to lock down. In fact, April of 2020, unemployment peaked at 23.1 million. That's an unemployment rate that exceeded 14.5%. Now, as a result, consumers last year spent $500 billion less in 2020 than they had spent just the year before. As you know, businesses went belly up. Others were laying off workers. Manufacturers were cutting back. We were unable to get certain chips and things that we need for things. And as a result, the government injected trillions of dollars. It's all projected to exceed here $6 trillion in COVID relief when this is all said and done. And it's set the table here for what we're talking about this morning on Secure Retirement Radio, the inflation crisis. And do you need to start thinking about this? Because as Americans are getting vaccinated, businesses are reopening. Inflation, it appears, is on fire. Many of the industries hurt by the pandemic are starting to ramp up, and they're starting to try to catch up with consumer demand. The low supply, high demand scenario, what it did? April's inflation numbers, 4.2%. Numbers we haven't seen in decades here. In fact, Peter Schiff, economist, inflation expert, says that, he's projecting a 20% year-over-year increase in inflation. Now, why do we bring this up? Because if you aren't putting inflation into your retirement planning, if it's really just about the investment strategies and all it is whether or not you should be buying or selling fixed income or some international stocks or whatever, it's only a piece of the puzzle. And unless we start to bring that inflation strategy to an overall comprehensive plan, a strategy on how to take your money back, how to make it last a lifetime, how to be tax efficient with it, well, you might end up being forced to dramatically change your spending habits somewhere in retirement. I have been doing this for over 25 years. I've never once sat down with somebody that was getting ready to retire that said, Joe, I want to get to a lower economic status than when I was going into retirement. We also know that the 74%, almost 3/4 of us, fear running out of money. Now, the fastest way that I know that you're 80, 85 years old, chock full of life, but can't afford your lifestyle is by ignoring inflation, ignoring the impact of inflation around taxes, healthcare, long-term care, the gasoline pumps, the groceries, you name it. the value of your retirement savings could be less and less each year. For the last 2 decades, 2000 to 2020, average inflation was hovering at about 2%. And as I just stated, April's numbers at 4.2, this is really kind of scary stuff. And we want to make sure that especially if you're in the golden decade between the age of 60 and 70, you're getting ready to retire. Let's make sure that we are bringing inflation fighting strategies into the retirement planning for you.
No, and you mentioned that the last 20 years, inflation has been hovering just over 2%. It's where it's been. It hasn't been a concern. Really, it's kind of been under the rug a little bit. That 4.2 number comes out in April. Highest since we've seen since the 2008 financial crisis. And we start talking to families that are in and nearing retirement, and the majority, or Social Security is going to be their foundation of their income plan. That mailbox income we talk about is that income that's to be hitting the checkbook each and every month, regardless of what's going on with Wall Street. And even with the last 20 years of inflation only around 2%, their Social Security benefits have lost 33% of their buying power over the last 20 years.
Well, they've lost 33% of their buying power for the most part because, the health Medicare expenses are keeping up with the increases. The cost of living adjustments are no longer you're break even at best. But understand that Social Security by itself is a completely tax-free income stream. Any of us joining us here this morning on Secure Retirement Radio would ever have to file another tax return if the only income you needed was Social Security. But if inflation comes back and rears its ugly head here, Social Security may not be the only strategy out there, right? We need to start looking at, and for most Americans, you probably need to start looking at how to take the rest of the assets back, make it tax efficient, make it last a lifetime. And also, don't underscore the importance of making sure you get the Social Security decision right. I mean, this is probably the biggest financial decision. That house you bought back in 1980, and it was the biggest check you'd ever written, and how scary that was. Well, all too often we're seeing families, and they're just making hip shots. They're just guessing at how to take their Social Security, and according to numerous reports, 96% of Americans are leaving an average of $111,000. Now, if inflation comes back, that 96% that are making decisions that are going to impact the amount of money that they get from Social Security, that could be a real decision maker that you wish you could replay somewhere in your later 70s or early 70s, for that matter.
Well, and you talk about just the last 20 years and losing 33% of the buying power there, and whether it's Medicare or whatever the offsets end up being, we start seeing higher inflation rates coming, with the 4.2, and we're projecting, we're hearing the reports of 20%, right? Making sure you get this Social Security decision right is more important today than it maybe ever has been.
When we start thinking about where to get advice around our retirement planning, a lot of times many of you are very astute and can easily manage your own investments. I talk about the 3 levels of service that you should demand from your financial institutions. That very basic level is, let's have a cost-effective way that we can purchase and sell investments. And if we're doing it on our own, that allow us to do that without, and there's a lot of groups out there, Charles Schwab, Fidelity's, the Robinhood accounts that you can buy and sell the investments if you're calling the shots yourself. And for many families, that works just fine. You just want to make sure that it might make some sense to make sure that there aren't any blind spots that you're missing. The next level is where we see the vast majority of professionals in our industry, Dylan, is those professionals that, they kind of consider themselves investment strategists, right? It's all about the returns they're getting, how to put together a portfolio, what kind of investments should we be using? Here's a good mutual fund. I like this mutual fund better than this fund. Let's trade that out when you sit down with them. And that's that next level of service. But really, if you want to start looking at how to fight things like inflation, how to make sure that we're going to have money that lasts a lifetime, you need to have an income plan. You need to have it put together and documented on how you're going to take this back. A strategy to reduce taxes is important. How do we get more mailbox income? Things like Social Security that hit the checkbook each and every month, regardless of what's going on in the 401k balance. and optimizing it so that you can get more from it is absolutely essential. And rarely do you get that unless you are working with professionals that are looking at the entire picture like this.
Oh, and that's why, one of the three reasons why families hire us, right? The first is they want an income plan that, they're not going to outlive, and they're going to be able to maintain their lifestyle into retirement. And the second is they want to save on taxes, not just this year, but over the lifetime of their retirement. And then the third is, if we can, we're going to try and grow your wealth, but we're not going to do that at the sacrifice of the income plan and saving on taxes long term.
Having mailbox income is one of the best ways to fight inflation. Money that hits the checkbook regardless of what's going on, and the one that 90% of us all have access to is Social Security benefits of some kind. Now, if you've had an average or above average income throughout your career, I hate to say this, but some of the traditional rules around Social Security, they probably don't even apply to you. For example, the traditional rule of thumb that you and the spouse both wait until age 70 to take your benefits could actually be costing you money. Now, that's because when you consider the real impact of other things like taxes, required distributions, Medicare premiums, spousal benefits, the net income, the money that you actually get to keep ends up being far less. That's why we're making the special offer here this morning on Secure Retirement Radio, just for the listeners that are joining us. You can learn how you can get even more income when you file your Social Security with a free, customized, secured retirement Social Security analysis. The analysis will show you thousands of different options on how to file benefits. It will help pinpoint the exact time for you to file those benefits, and it considers the impact of the benefits, the Social Security, against things like taxes, required distributions, Medicare premiums, everything. The results for many families is often shocking. Now, I've seen advisors charging $1,000 for this. There's no cost. If you call us here this morning from Secure Retirement Radio, tell them that you want to get the Secured Retirement Tax Analysis. I'm going to do it pro bono. To schedule your free, customized, the tailored Social Security analysis, call right now at 952-777-8838. That's 952-777-8838. You need to do this because there could be hundreds of thousands of dollars at stake. You need to optimize your Social Security. Get the Secured Retirement Social Security analysis, 952-777-8838. 8838.
When we come back, we'll share some strategies that can help you stay 10 steps ahead of inflation.
He's a certified financial planner, fiduciary, and a contributor to the Wall Street Journal. And he's no ordinary Joe. You're listening to Joe Lucy on Secured Retirement Radio.
Glenn Beck, weekdays from 9 to 11 on Twin Cities News Talk AM 1130 and 103.5 FM.
And if you think that these words mean nothing, you're wrong.
And on iHeartRadio with your smart speaker.
You want to know how you could get even more income when you file for Social Security?
But you're paying more for groceries these days than just a couple years ago. Certainly paying more at the gas pump than we have prior to the pandemic. Paying a little bit more for, it seems like just about everything. And it's not your imagination. It's what Ronnie Reagan called the silent killer. It's inflation. It's a situation where even a 1%, 2%, even 3% doesn't seem like a lot until you get caught up into it. And if you're in or nearing retirement, this is the way that you can end up crippling your buying power, losing your lifestyle by not paying attention to it. Welcome back to Secure Retirement Radio. I'm Joe Lucy, certified financial planner. I got Dylan Malberg joining us, and we are talking about inflation and how it can impact your retirement. And this last segment here, why most successful investment strategies that used to be able to help us fight inflation could end up actually costing us some buying power.
Well, and we think about the biggest hedge for inflation, and kind of what we hear is just put it in the stock market. The S&P 500, it averages 10% with dividends reinvested, and what we can find out is that may pose a maybe even a bigger risk to your retirement than even inflation. And what that is that sequence of returns risk and retiring into a down market.
That sequence of returns risk where the money that you have invested, if it's 100% invested and the markets come down, you're forced to take money out and lock in losses. And if we're in a rising interest rate environment and you can't recoup those losses, that might be the fastest way that I know that you can go broke. And we don't want to have anybody ever do that. So we want to look in this environment we're in. We got an interest rates that are probably going to rise. That means that the fixed income portion of your account could actually suffer. The other alternative, put it all into CDs and cash and get zero. So what is an investor to do? Well, you need to start looking for options on how to protect the market fluctuations from the money that you're going to need for expenses. And there's a variety of ways. If you're not exploring these with somebody, you want to make sure you do that, because just going and trying to fight inflation by putting 100% of your money into the markets, well, that could be quite costly. Keep in mind, there's a lot of different economists out there that are threatening or telling us that we need to start bringing in inflation. And all too often we find portfolios that when we are visiting with families, it's really just about the returns. It's not about how to take the money back. It's not about more important things like how do I make sure that it's tax efficient? How do I reduce my tax burden, cut out Uncle Sam a little bit, and keep more for me so that I have more? It's about optimizing things like Social Security, who has a cost of living adjustment component to it, but making sure you're doing so in a tailored approach that's really about what you're trying to accomplish with your investments. Peter Schiff had talked about how he's expecting to see possibly a 20% year-over-year increase in inflation. Now, I said it at the intro here. 1%, 2%, 3% doesn't seem like much. That's why Ronnie Reagan called it the silent killer. But it will erode your life savings. And growing your retirement savings is more challenging today than it ever has been. The fastest and safest way that you might be able to grow your nest egg right now, it could be by reducing taxes. Less to the IRS, more for you. That's why we've been making the special offer this morning for secured retirement tax analysis. It's very simple. We gather some information. We bring it to the labs. We come back to you and we show you exactly how much money you could be saving. The only way to get this secured retirement tax analysis is to call the office right now at 952-777-8838. That's 952-777-8838. That's all we have time for this week's show. We'll be back next Saturday with more from Secured Retirement Radio.
He's a certified financial planner, fiduciary, and a contributor to the Wall Street Journal. And he's no ordinary Joe. You're listening to Joe Lucy on Secured Retirement Radio.
Broadcasting on AM 1130, 103.5 FM, 100.3 HD2, and worldwide on iHeartRadio. This is the Twin Cities News Talk Station, KTLK AM, Minneapolis.
Kevin Sharkey here. If you love my paintings as much as I do and you'd like to see my new collection, please go to kevinsharkeyart.com or Merrion Square every Sunday, weather permitting. And from the 1st of June, the Sharkey Gallery in New Street Mall, Malahide, will be open 7 days a week. For more information, see kevinsharkeyart.com. We accept Bitcoin.